Hello everybody, hope you're doing well. Bit of a random one this week, just me. Last week we weren't able to podcast, both just very busy with work and other things, and we never want to kind of make ourselves podcast if that's going to make life too stressful. So Luke's still quite busy this week. I'm away with work actually. I'm in Sheffield, beautiful city, visiting my sister and her husband. So that's why I've got a different setup here as well. I'm just talking into my phone camera. But yeah, had a bit of time this afternoon, so thought I'd put together a bit of a podcast on my own, go through last week, chat through some of the options for this week, give over double game week 25 as well, and some of my general thoughts. So yeah, apologies, the quality won't be as high. It's just me and my phone camera, and yeah, just me rather than Luke this week. But yeah, let's just crack on. Let's go for it. And whether you're listening to this or watching it, it doesn't really matter this week because there's not going to be any graphics on the screen or anything like that. I hope you all had a good game week 23. I had an okay game week 23. Very average. I scored 79, which I think was like the average score. Or 78 I got. I was literally a point off getting a green arrow. It's a bit frustrating, but it was looking bad. And then the last game went well for me. I had De Bruyne and Saka as well. I mean, like many people who are into analytics, I've got Edison, which has been very, very frustrating. Absolutely killer the last few weeks. The fact that him and Kepa, if you've got them both as well, keep outscoring each other. Depending on who's got the more difficult fixture, tends to do better, which is very frustrating. But also, like, this week was ridiculous. I mean, Kepa played first, got the 2 points. So we're kind of like, I was joking to Luke saying, oh, imagine if Edison still finds a way to get less points. And he very nearly did. I mean, he could easily have been sent off for a second yellow, which would have left him on like 0 points overall. And even in that second game, if he just conceded one more goal, he'd have got 2 points overall, the same as Kepa. So yeah, very frustrating to own. I cannot wait to sell him, probably in game week 25 for Pickford or for another goalkeeper as well around that time. I guess it was a funny week in that it was maybe up until that last game, it was kind of people who were having a great week started Shaw and owned Mahrez. People who weren't having a great week didn't start Shaw and didn't own Mahrez. So it felt like it swung on just a couple of things. One of my kind of thoughts on that is that I saw a lot of people on Twitter who were annoyed, that or thought it was a mistake that they benched Shaw. And actually, for a lot of teams who benched Shaw, it was a perfectly reasonable decision. Like, it didn't even require a lot of thought. For most people because of the way their team was set up. And and even with the outcome, if you look at the underlying data, like most people, like Leeds normally score in that game. Their XG was over 2, and Shaw wasn't particularly attacking. He only went to left back towards the end, puts in one cross, brilliant header from Rashford. So even with the outcome, I don't think it was a mistake for those people. But I'd also say there shouldn't be any grievance towards those who started him either, because also for those who started him, it was a pretty easy decision. I think most people this week. It just depends on their team structure. If they've also got Patterson and Bueno, for example, it was pretty obvious he needed to start Shaw. Mahrez, great pick for those who went there a few weeks ago. I didn't go with that pick. I read his minutes completely wrong. Didn't think he was anywhere nearly as nailed as he has been the last few weeks. Whether that will change this weekend, who knows? But yeah, thankfully I managed to get a grey arrow, a tiny red arrow in the end. I did Bruno to De Bruyne, so I was pleased that worked out, and that was a good decision in the end. And then I did that Martinelli to Odegaard switch, and lots of people did. I think Martinelli got one more point in the end actually, but I would be absolutely fine with that if you're if you've done that switch. I think that made perfect sense, and you're now really well set up. If you didn't make that switch, I would say now's not the time to do it. I think you needed to commit to that first double. Now the upside of doing it isn't as high, particularly given that you'll need to prepare and have players for 25 as well. And I guess just on that idea of judging decisions as well and trying to work that out afterwards, it can be very easy to constantly think, oh, that was a bad decision. Oh, sorry, that was a good decision, but a bad outcome, etc. But I think there are loads of times when I've made really bad decisions this season as well. I think game week 19, I didn't start Mitrovic. Probably should have. It seemed from the press conference he maybe wasn't going to play, but it was quite 50-50, and we know that Fulham have a history of lying about that, particularly with Mitrovic, so it's probably worth the gamble of starting him. I didn't start him, he got 15 points. I started the whole season with Ward and Iverson it was the wrong time to do it. The fixtures were really bad. I just got tempted by that extra 0.5 to spend on my outfield. And then a lot of people did well with that later on when they started to massively, start to get quite lucky and keep clean sheets. But in general, that was a bad decision. So we sit here quite a lot every week and say, oh, that was a bad, fine decision, bad outcome. But, we don't think that about all our decisions, I guess is what I'm trying to say. In terms of the next game week and in general, I'm just going to go through each of the teams really one by one in terms of the teams that are actually relevant, I guess, at the moment, and discuss some of their assets. I've already touched on Arsenal already. I basically think, I think it's an interesting one. I think if you were to free hit now, or wild card now, sorry, and you just had a completely clean slate, you're obviously going to have triple Arsenal. I think I'd probably I think you have to go with Saka and Odegaard, and I think Gabriel's probably the other one, or Nketiah. I think Gabriel, Odegaard and Saka would be the three I'd go for, who I now own, which is why I did the Martinelli to Odegaard switch. So they're still really, really good assets, and they're all really underpriced. And I still think even if you've got White now, I think even though he's been benched once, I'm not sure how that's going to play out. I imagine he'll get his spot back, considering how much Tomiyasu struggled, but it also seems very harsh for Arteta to throw in Tommy against the best team in the league, one of the best teams in the world, for him to struggle and then to drop him straight away. But then also maybe it's just a rest for White, and that's why he did it. That seems unlikely given the opposition. It was probably more tactical, but whether it was tactical or a potential long-term change, we'll find that out. So I'd stick with whichever Arsenal players you have now, probably. I think that's probably the best way to do it. I think Saka has really kind of proved, I mean, it's easy to say, isn't it, when a player's literally just got a penalty. But that's why we like penalty takers. Same goes for Kane, Salah. It's just so valuable. That extra 4 or 5 goals you're probably going to get a season is huge. And that's why I think Saka's worth that extra money over Odegaard or Martinelli. And then relating that to Salah, if Salah just happened to have, he's not had a single penalty all season. If he happened to have just 2 or 3 penalties, we would be thinking very differently about him, I think. If he happened to be really lucky and have 5 or 6 penalties already, he'd be right up there with the top scoring midfielders. So there's always that hope. And I guess the other thing with penalty takers is you can play badly but get a penalty as well. So even if a team's struggling and they've lost key players, they've got tough fixtures, etc., if they're a penalty taker, you feel a bit safer playing them as well. They just add so much valuable to them each individually as assets. Couple of thoughts on Nketiah. I think he's pretty safe, moving forward probably up until game week 26 at the least. Just based on what Arteta said, he said he's out on the grass now. He's trained on his own, but he said he's he said to me weird, he's doing some walking with the football, which may seem weird, but that basically means he's on the grass. He's not sprinting yet. He'll be doing some landing work, probably doing some light jogging. I'd imagine that's just generally how these things kind of work. But when he's at that stage, it's going to be a couple of weeks before he's then running. It's then probably going to be another week or so before they're happy with him to put him in with a full team training session, and then they've got to be comfortable starting him. But not only that, they've got to be comfortable that he's got his. They've got to actually build his match fitness up as well. It's not just a case of recovering from an injury. It's about getting ready to play 90 minutes. So even when we know Gabriel's in full training, you've probably got a couple of weeks left of Nketiah then still, because Gabriel's probably going to come off the bench for 30 minutes initially, maybe then 45 minutes, maybe then start. But even then, who's to say that Gabriel comes straight back in for Nketiah? I probably think he probably does. Nketiah's been very good. He could just hold that place as well. Moving on to Man United, just a couple of thoughts on that. I think basically I would just say don't be scared to sell Man United players now. I think if you can keep Rashford in 25, that's great. He's really, really good value in general, and this season particularly. It's amazing what a difference it can make just tactically, having a different manager, losing a player like Ronaldo who could change the way they played completely. There's obviously a psychological element, I guess, with confidence as well, but that, it's always going to seem like that's the case, because if you're scoring goals, you're likely to be in a good mood anyway. The team's likely to be winning matches, so it's easy just to credit it to confidence, and I'm sure that plays a bit of a part, but I think it's mainly a tactical thing. We already knew that Rashford could do this. Did he score 20, maybe 19 league goals a few seasons ago? He's very, very, very capable, very, very talented player. and it's just great. Like he's such a good player. So um, I think I'm not a Man United fan, but I'm just pleased to see him doing well because he seems like a good guy. Same with Saka. To be honest, they just seem like really good lads. But I do think you can be like, I think if you can sell Bruno now, that's absolutely fine. And Luke Shaw, like, don't feel like you have to hold him either. They're really, really easy transfers out. I think particularly going into 25, you'll probably, if you've got Trippier again, you probably want to try and keep Trippier. You probably want to try and keep Rashford. You're probably going to have another player who doesn't play. So Bruno's like fine to sell. He frees up money to go to Salah if you've not got Salah already as well. So like, don't be worried about selling those players at all, in my opinion. I think it's a shame because like they're one of those teams where there's always a bit of a dilemma because they're playing so well at the moment. United, like playing really well, particularly their attacks, extremely good. But it's just not a time to buy them, is it? If you've not got three, like don't buy a third now. So I wouldn't be thinking about those players right now. And I'd also say just game week 24 in general depends on your teams, but I think for most teams it makes sense to roll, so you have more knowledge going into that double in 25. Which I think is why a lot of people last week used up both their free transfers, if they had them. I can just feel this camera slipping. It's currently rested on a can of kidney beans on top of a speaker. There we go. Lovely stuff. Newcastle, I thought I'd chat a bit about Newcastle because they're very good and a lot of players own players from Newcastle, but again, they don't have a double coming up. In fact, they blank in 25. I kind of feel similar about Trippier as I do about Rashford. I think if your team's in a good enough place where you can hold him through that 25, then do it. But like, yeah, I would like really advise it if you can. But if that's not possible and you need to sell to be able to play 11, or selling allows you to have, I don't know, Trent or Darwin or Salah, like I think and you've got a plan to get them back. Again, you can do that in some situations depending on chip strategy as well, which again, you might have more of an idea on towards 25. So I would say that. I would also say with Trippier, just like don't be scared to bench him this week as well. It's also like Shaw last week. It's very team dependent. I put a tweet out saying, well, what I just said about Shaw in terms of for most people it's an easy decision to either bench him or to start him. Saying it was the same for Trippier this week. Since then, I think I've changed my mind from looking at other people's teams. I think it is more of a difficult situation for some people this week. I think with a player like Walker or Ake, I think you probably play Trippier instead. Although it's close, just because, I mean, in my opinion, you'd rather have Walker and Ake if they're starting, but it's the risk of that cameo that it becomes really frustrating. That probably would make me just go Trippier. I would play a Brentford defender over Trippier this week. I would play Dunk over Trippier for sure. Even like Kilman, if some of you have got him. Like teams with a good fixture. Ultimately, Liverpool's a really tough fixture, and like I'm fully aware that Trippier can get a 15-pointer, but ultimately it is unlikely against Liverpool. Like it can be really tempting with these players who are really good to say, oh no, this player's capable of hauling. It's like, yeah, we know that. It happens with Haaland all the time. Like people saying, oh, Haaland could just, like, even if Haaland doesn't start, he could come off the bench and haul. It's like, but yeah, well, of course he could, but still, if you knew he wasn't starting, you wouldn't captain him, would you? So it can be easy to get into that mindset with big players who've gone big in the past, but you still have to remember that fixtures impact them. So this week with Trippier, I think it's absolutely fine to bench him. But with other people, like, it'll be an easier decision to start him as well. But for those of you who have a dilemma over like a Wolves player or a Brentford player or a Brighton player, for example, I probably wouldn't play Trippier. I'm just going to have a quick look as well at some of the other fixtures. Yeah, if you've got a Chelsea defender, again, you probably play them over Trippier as well. Shaw, you play over Trippier, I think, probably. Ben White's an interesting one, I guess, because we don't know whether he's going to start. I think I'd play White over Trippier if I was confident White was going to start. And the fact he came off the bench and is very likely to come off the bench if he doesn't start means I'd probably actually go with Trippier on that one, I think. But that's a close one. Similar to the Man City assets, I think. I guess also on Newcastle, Almiron as well. Like a lot of people got rid of him and now he's started to return. For those who held him, he's just got a couple of returns in a couple of weeks. He's another one where I think he's a really easy sell going into 25. And like if you're going to sell him and you've got two free transfers now, he's probably a nice player to remove going into 25 also. So I guess the big thing with United and Newcastle is like don't be scared about selling them. if it's best for your team, if you think you get more EV or expected value, expected points from them, either based on a model or based on your own thoughts, then just do it. Like, take into account the money, the value that you'll lose. So that's why, I'd probably like only sell Trippier if it allows me. I don't have Trippier actually, but I think if you've got Trippier, I'd probably only sell him if it allows you to have, for example, Trent or Darwin, or really get a huge benefit out of one of the doubles. Try and keep him otherwise. I thought I'd chat a bit about Chelsea, because I think Chelsea are a really interesting team because they don't have any doubles, don't have any blanks, but also they have good fixtures, particularly from game week 26. I believe they play Everton, Leeds and Leicester. Don't think in that order, but they play those three things, 26, 27, 28. And I think that means they're kind of like a safe buy if you don't know what your chip strategy is yet. Because it means if you suddenly decide not to play your free hit in a blank, you've got a player who plays. And if you don't, if there's other players you'd rather play in a double, at least you've got a player with a good fixture, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So like Felix is like definitely a really good option. He's looked great when he's played. We know he's a good player, good underlying data historically. And with the amount, I guess the key thing with Felix is the amount of money they paid for him makes it like pretty obvious that he's nailed. I think otherwise they wouldn't give out that amount of money for him. The fact that Aubameyang's not even in their squad for the Champions League, like I think it's pretty clear that Felix is probably number one there. So he's a nice one. I think he's probably for a lot of people like me who have Mitrovic in 26. Mitrovic's fixtures get worse. He's probably a nice transfer in then as well for Mitrovic for some people. I think from 26, Mitrovic has Brentford, Arsenal and Liverpool. I think they're the three players. James is back from injury now. We all buy him and then he gets injured again. So I would be really, really hesitant to get James. Like when you know he's going to start, he's obviously fantastic because of his underlying data and his ability to, not just to get clean sheets like Kepa, but to go forward is like, his ability going forward is so good that if you know he's going to start, he's great, but I just don't trust him. It's not just the fact he could pick up another injury, it's like the early subs. Like it's really, you see managers sometimes, and again I know this from working with managers, that some of them will like plan substitutions for specific times. So managers will literally go into a game knowing, right, this player's going to play 60 minutes. And I guess 60 is just used because it's quite a nice round number quite a lot of the time. It's an hour. And that'll often be based on advice from the performance team if a player's managing an injury. But it will just happen more with players like James, where he's not managing an injury anymore, but they're just trying to be careful with him. And I would say with Chelsea, we see that happen all the time. Like so often substitutions happen like 59th minute, 60th minute, 61st minute, because they know that's generally about the time. So the risk of him losing a clean sheet or the gamble of him then banking a clean sheet early is quite high. So I would just be really, I don't think many people are thinking about getting James because of doubles, but he's one I'd be hesitant of in general, but is nice because Chelsea assets are nice in general because of what I mentioned with them playing so consistently. Spurs, what would I say about Spurs? I think with Spurs, they're not a team we should be targeting to buy because they don't blank in 25, and I really wouldn't hesitate on Kane to Darwin as well in 25 because of that double. But I'm like massive on Nunes. I think I'm not a Liverpool fan even, but I just think Nunes is absolutely world class, and I know his like Premier League goals don't reflect that this year. Like I'm fully aware of that, fully aware that he misses big chances, but just from watching him play, the chaos he causes, the way he brings other players into the game, that pass to Salah, like running at like 30 kilometers an hour and just putting that ball over the top on a plate for him. Although I don't know what Pickford was doing, like the fact he can do stuff like that, the fact he gets so many shots, like I just think he's brilliant. I think when you look at his underlying data, the fact that's close to Haaland's or even near to close is like ridiculous. Like he's ridiculously good for his age, and I think he's going to score lots of goals. Either the back end of this season or going into next season. Like I just think, he's some player. The thing that makes it interesting though, and what might stop the Kane to Darwin move for some people is the fact Jota and Firmino are back. Now I've already got Nunes, so that's quite nice because it puts other people off buying him potentially. And then if Nunes does play, suddenly he's low owned. But it could also be like an absolute nightmare having Nunes if he's then benched for one of those games in the double. Yeah, I suppose Kane like is similar to what I said about Rashford and Trippier. Like, don't be scared to sell them if you think that's best for your team. But like, yeah, obviously put that extra bit of thought into it, based on the fact you might need to buy them back at some point. Um, and yeah, I mean, are there any other Spurs players like we're considering at the moment? Probably not. Like, I would 100% consider Son if they were doubling, for example. I'm just going to have a quick look at Spurs' fixtures as well. So Spurs have got 24, West Ham 25, Chelsea. Yeah, because they've not got a good fixture as well in 25. Yeah, Wolves. The tricky things, they've got Wolves, Forest, and Southampton in 26, 27, and 28 though. Yeah, tricky. So with, I guess with like Spurs in general, like I don't know. I've seen a lot of negative like tweets and comments about Spurs like being a mess from Spurs fans, but they're not a mess. Like, they're doing absolutely fine. Last year they got fourth. No one expected them to. That was all because of Conte. Came and managed to get fourth place. They're still in the Champions League. They've lost the first leg 1-0, but they're still in it. They're like 3 points off fourth place. Like, it's fine. And I get that fans get annoyed because it's boring football because of Conte, but that, like, they should have expected that. Like, it always is when you have Conte. Like, defensive football is what he's very good at. So I don't think Spurs fans should be panicking as much as they are. But I think Arsenal doing so well probably plays into that. It's not me having a dig at Spurs fans at all. It's just that I think naturally that would happen. You demand more from your team when you see your rivals doing well on probably like a similar like budget, I guess, and similar spending. Just having another quick look at Spurs here. Yeah, they do potentially double in 29, which is interesting, but they're not ones we should be targeting now. Liverpool, like I've already mentioned them, but I just think go big for the double. Don't wait and see like, oh, how are they going to do against Newcastle? Like, we know they're a really good attack. Like, if you look at their like underlying attacking numbers this season, like they're nowhere near as they were. They aren't as good as they were last season, but they're still right up there. Like all season, I've just been, well, not from the beginning, of course. Obviously, I thought Trent was going to be great value, but the last like 7 or 8 game weeks, since it's been like obvious how bad Liverpool are defensively, I just like cannot justify Trent Alexander-Arnold at his price tag at all. But again, it's a double game week, and we know how good he is going forward. He obviously has the potential to haul, so Trent's a great option for the double game week. Just looking at their expected goals this season, yeah, like their third best team for expected goals this season, Liverpool, like 4 expected goals behind Arsenal. Like, they've probably been a bit unlucky. They've probably finished poorly. It's a mixture of things. The key thing that's poor is like their midfield, which impacts the defence, in my opinion. And I suppose another reason that Trent might be a good option now is the fact that Van Dijk's back. I think they're expecting Van Dijk to start this weekend, which is great if you're a Liverpool fan, and great if you already have Trent or are thinking about buying him. And it was an absolute joke he didn't get that assist, by the way. Like, that's crazy. I think he was like definitely trying to play the ball to Robertson. But like, I don't know, I think players of that standard, when they're putting a cross in, they're not necessarily picking out one player in that same way. They're putting the ball in a certain direction in front of a couple of players, knowing the first player might miss it, into a general area. And when you look at, there's a Rafinha assist given last season or the season before, where like, even in the justification, Fantasy Premier League said like the intended destination was the 6-yard box. So it doesn't need to be a specific player either. So I think Trent owners got really hard done by that. Darwin I've already touched on. Like, I think he's amazing. And I guess the reality is like most people are probably only can have Salah plus Trent or Darwin, most likely. And I think that, yeah, I think a lot of that will be determined not by how they play against Newcastle, but like minutes for Firmino and Jota against Newcastle as well. Like, how early does if Nunes suddenly goes off in the 50th minute or at half time, suddenly you think, oh, maybe I'll just go with Trent. But I think many like taking a hit to get both is fine, and just like you should definitely own Salah. Like, I'm almost 100% sure I'll be captaining Salah in 25 unless he picks up a knock or there's some worry about minutes. Like, I will definitely captain him. Like, Saka's a good option as well, but I think Salah's by far the best option that game week. So if you're like worried and thinking, oh, is Salah going to come into form, or maybe I'm going to get him now because he scored a goal against Everton because he happened to score a tap in, like, he's Mo Salah, he's class. And like, even if you look at this season, his like non-penalty XG data's still really good. Like, not as good as it was, but he's one of the best attackers with a double game week, and they're both good fixtures. And he's got some quite nice fixtures after that as well. So I would still really strongly consider yeah, I would just definitely get Salah for that double. I thought I'd touch on Man City. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, I've been through the big 6 plus Newcastle, and I know that's yeah, like that'll annoy people because like there are other teams to consider, but actually the reality there's not necessarily that many other teams to consider. I think one thing that we'll all be considering going to that 25, some of us will want some extra funds because we're trying to get, for example, Salah or Trent. So there will be budget options we consider that play that game week. I think Tarkovsky is a great option. I think doing like Edison to Pickford's a good option if you've already got him as well. And then Brentford players as well potentially also within that game week. Also, the reason I say that is 25 Brentford play. Okay, yeah, sorry, that's my mistake. Do not buy Brentford players; they blank in 25. Brighton, maybe that's what I meant. Yeah. No, Brighton blank. What am I thinking? Who blanks? Brighton, Brentford. Yeah, I guess that's why like Everton are such a it's the fact they double in 25. That's it. Ignore me ignore that last minute of me speaking. I guess I keep forgetting that 25 is a double, as well as a blank because that's such an unusual thing. So yeah, that's why I had Everton players in my head. So I would just target Everton players, and that's a downgrade to Pickford, downgrade to Tarkovsky, for example. Yeah, sorry, my head's gone there. I'm a bit tired. Don't buy Brentford players that week. Something to bear in mind is at game week 26, when you're thinking about chip strategy, like there's a chance that Brighton won't double in 26 because of 27, not 26, because that game Brighton Palace is rearranged because of train strikes, and there's now more train strikes planned for that weekend when the game is rearranged. So I would just keep an eye on Ben Crellin's Twitter basically on that one. Man City stuff, like normally Luke, as you know, is like the expert in predicting that lineup and stuff like that. He's already done that all through a tweet on his Twitter, so I thought I'd just point people towards there. For this weekend, like there's lots of things he's had to take into account in terms of how Forest will set up, which is slightly more awkward because they've got a couple of centre-backs injured. Like, does that change their shape and therefore change what City do? Maybe. There's lots to consider in the fact that Mahrez has like consistently played Champions League in previous seasons. But was that because he wasn't first choice for the league when he's clearly first choice now? Like, there's loads of thought that Luke's had to put into it this year. So go over to Luke's Twitter. I think it's at FF Luke, and you can see all his like justification for his predicted team for this weekend. But that predicted team is Edison, Akanji, Diaz, and Laporte. So he predicts no Ake, but I think that was quite a close call. It was basically Ake, Laporte, and Diaz for three of them for two spaces. It's that kind of 3-2-2-3 formation of then Rodri and Lewis in midfield, De Bruyne and Gundogan, Foden, Haaland, and Bernardo Silva, and that's all to do with because of, I guess, of fixtures being close together, wanting to have their best team for the Champions League, which at the moment definitely includes Grealish and Mahrez. And I think Haaland, they definitely could have his minutes managed this week. That's just my thought on that. I would probably put his expected minutes at maybe 72 minutes, maybe 70, around about there. I think if I had to predict it, I'd probably predict he plays 65. There's always the chance they're not winning and he has to stay on later. That's just my thought on that. I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't think that changes anything in terms of captaincy, to be honest. I'm not going to talk anymore about Man Utd. You can go over to Luke's Twitter and see that team and his reasoning for that. Before I just go to some questions to finish, I just wanted to chat about chip strategy, just really briefly though, because we're going to cover this on the next podcast in a lot more detail. I would just say you just need to be quite open. You don't need to have a plan set in stone now because it's going to depend on lots of things, and for most of us it will depend on whether Liverpool and Fulham play in game week 28 or not, because otherwise a lot of us will be struggling, and that might mean we free hit 28. I would say there are basically four main routes people will go down, and two of those involve free hitting 28. There's basically the option to wildcard before 28, free hit 28, and then you're set up for a bench boost, and you have the option of 29, 34 or 37 to bench boost. You could free hit 28 but then wildcard later if your team's really set up for 27, 29, 30, 31, and then you can buy wildcard in 33. You could free hit in 29 when there's a double there if your team's well set up for 28, or you could free hit later and wildcard in 29 instead. Again, if your team's well set up for 28, wildcard 29, and then save a free hit for another double, and then bench boost in one of the other doubles as well. So like there's probably more options this year. Like those 4 ideas I've got there, that's just literally from Ben Krill, and I'm not pretending that I've gone through and worked it all out. Like if you've got someone who's an absolute expert at it, see what they do. So Ben put those 4 options up and said he'll probably do one of those. But in previous seasons, Ben has said like this is obviously the best thing to do. Wildcard here, bench boost here, etc. I think it's probably a lot more team dependent this week as well. And also just don't limit yourself to that free hit. In 25, it depends. Don't limit yourself to one of those strategies because, for example, Tom from Who Got the Assists podcast, he's free hitting in 25 as well. And that's just because it works for his team. And like for most people, that would be, wouldn't make sense. But he's got no Liverpool players, and there are lots of other reasons that makes logical sense for his team. So I think it's more team dependent than normal. Just to finish, just going to go over just 4 very quick questions that I've got through Twitter that I asked beforehand. And bear with me while I just get those up. So. Yeah, we had a few different questions, and they're all like fairly specific questions to people's teams, but a lot of people have similar dilemmas this week. So I'll just shoot through those really fast. At FPL, the Ron manager, do you think there's any point in buying a City defender this week? Because there's a danger Mahrez might be dropped. I don't think you should be buying a Man City defender this week. I think there's just too much rotation in the back line, and there's probably just higher priority for buying players who double in 25, basically, particularly trying to get Trent instead now, for example. And if I was going to get a defender that doesn't double, then I want to get one that's more guaranteed for minutes, given that you're unlikely to have a good sub coming on. Josh asked, with the threat of rotation, is it better to have to strengthen our third bench defender with a Wolves or Everton player? Wolves, that's the other team I was thinking of before. Yeah, Wolves. So Kilman's probably a good option in defence, as is Tarkowski. We don't know what Bueno's minutes will be like yet. But yeah, Tarkowski is a really good option there because obviously we don't want an Everton defender long term, and he's a nice cheap option. So I think that is worth it, Josh. And it's worth it because, you've then got a player who doubles. So I target from those 2 teams. FPL Abe, I want to transfer out Botman. I want to target 25. Is Gomez an option? Thoughts on Tarkowski? I've covered Tarkowski there. Gomez I don't think is an option just because Van Dijk's back and Matic probably plays. So I would avoid Joe Gomez. Another question saying, when is the podcast released from 20 minutes ago? It will be soon. Is it worth a minus at 4 to take out White and get 3 Arsenal attackers? As I mentioned before, I think because we've only got 1 double now to work towards, that's probably not worth it now, in my opinion. And will you get Luke's City prediction? Yep, I've been through it already, so go to his Twitter account. They're all quite straightforward questions, which is why I shot through that really quickly. We'll be back podcasting on Thursday next week, hopefully with both of us, and be able to do that as a live stream again. Let me know if you've enjoyed this and it's a bit more rambly and lower quality, but hopefully still helpful for some of you. And feel free to message us on Twitter if you have any more questions and things like that. And captaincy, I've realised I forgot to cover, but I think it's pretty straightforward this week. Captain Erling Haaland. I think the only player who comes maybe close is like Kane, because that's quite a nice fixture against West Ham, and his minutes are so secured if you're really, really chasing. But I don't think it's worth it this week to go against Haaland. I think he's, I think he's going to start. So I would have him comfortably ahead of Kane, even if their EV is fairly similar. As well, and I guess the fact as well that Spurs are so poor at the moment, and the fact that now Forest have their 2 main centre backs injured makes Haaland even more appealing. Thanks for watching, everyone. Really appreciate it, and head over to our Twitter and find Luke's threads. Give us a follow, like and subscribe. We'd really appreciate it, and have a good weekend.